The real power in any relationship comes from the person you can't predict, because the moment you can't read someone, your mind starts chasing the mystery. And once that happens, you start thinking about them more than you plan to. They take up space in your head without doing anything dramatic, and suddenly you're more focused on their behavior than your own. It's a small shift, but it changes how you move around them, almost like you're waiting to see what they'll do next. Everyone knows at least one person like that. Sometimes they're completely normal on the surface. They just laugh and talk normally, but every now and then, they react in a way that doesn't match the moment. A joke lands and they go quiet. Something serious happens and they ignore it. They cancel plans out of nowhere, or they show up when you're not expecting them to. It doesn't destroy anything, it just bends reality a little. And that slight bend is enough for your brain to start paying closer attention than it does with anyone else. After a while, you notice how differently you treat them in your head. You replay conversations with them more, trying to figure out what felt slightly off. You don't do that with predictable people. Your mind actually relaxes around them. But with unpredictable people, your mind stays on alert. So the question isn't why they act this way. The real question is why this kind of behavior has such a strong grip on us. On the surface, it just looks like someone who reacts in ways you don't expect. But underneath, unpredictability pulls all the attention and control toward them. When you can't predict how someone will respond, your behavior changes without you realizing it. You become a little more cautious, and before you know it, they're the one setting the tone without having to do much. Staying hard to read is enough to tilt the dynamic in their favor. For a lot of people, that isn't about manipulation, it's about protection. Being easy to read feels risky. If someone can predict you, they can reach you in the exact places that hurt. They know what to say to get a specific reaction. They know how to push your buttons. So some people learn to blur the signals. They keep their internal world out of sync with their external behavior, just enough that nobody can draw a straight line from what they see to what's actually going on inside. Unpredictability then isn't random, it's a shield. Sometimes that shield comes from growing up around people who weren't consistent. When you never knew what version of someone you'd get, you learn to adjust fast and keep parts of yourself tucked away. And over time, that habit turns inward. You start becoming the person others can't quite read. Not because you're trying to confuse anyone, but because unpredictability once felt safer than being fully open. When people can't see all of you, they can't reach the places you've learned to protect. The mind also plays a big role in why this works. Our brains hate uncertainty. They're wired to look for patterns so we can predict what happens next. When someone acts in a consistent way, your mind relaxes. It doesn't have to work hard to understand them. But when someone breaks patterns repeatedly, your brain treats that as important information. It keeps scanning and it keeps trying to connect dots. That's why unpredictable people feel bigger in your mind than what they actually do. Your brain is working overtime around them, and that effort feels like importance. There's another layer too. Unpredictable behavior creates uneven rewards. Sometimes they're present and engaged, sometimes distant and cold. Sometimes they respond instantly, sometimes they disappear. That inconsistency can quietly hook you because your mind keeps waiting for the good version to show up again. Even if nothing extreme happens, that on and off rhythm makes the connection feel more intense than it really is. Not because the bond is deep, but because uncertainty keeps you emotionally awake. Of course, unpredictability isn't always subconscious. Some people realize that being hard to read gives them a certain kind of control. When others can't predict their reactions, they start approaching the person more carefully, and the whole dynamic shifts without anything being said. In that setup, unpredictability becomes a quiet way of holding power, because a little uncertainty is enough to influence how people behave around them. The problem is that this strategy doesn't work forever. In the beginning, unpredictability can make someone seem interesting, like there's more to understand, but after a while, the uncertainty gets tiring. Constant guessing wears people down, and the connection starts to feel one-sided. Predictability might not be thrilling, but it's what gives relationships something steady to stand on. Without that, even someone who was once intriguing eventually becomes exhausting to deal with. If you look at it from a distance, this isn't really about good or bad people. It's about how different people try to feel in control. Some rely on routines and consistency because that makes life feel manageable. Others feel safer when they stay unpredictable because being too easy to read makes them uncomfortable. Both reactions come from the fear of being too exposed. Unpredictability just hides that fear in a different way. There's also a hidden irony in all of this. The person acting unpredictable may feel like they're the one in control, but often they're just as controlled by their own defense mechanisms. They can't relax into stability because it doesn't feel safe. They can't show up the same way twice because consistency feels like vulnerability. So they shift their behavior just enough to stay hard to read. It protects them in some ways, but it also keeps them from ever being fully understood, even by the people who actually want to understand them. For the people around them, the real shift isn't about analyzing every move. It's about noticing what their unpredictability does to you. It makes you more alert and sometimes more tense than the situation deserves. Once you see that effect clearly, it becomes easier to step back and hold your ground. You don't need to mirror their behavior or solve it for them. You just have to choose how much space it's actually allowed to take in your mind. And if you notice some of this in yourself, it doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It just means that at some point, being hard to read felt like the safer option. reaction. The real question becomes whether that habit still serves you now. Because the same walls that keep the wrong people out can also block the people who would actually show up for you. In the end, unpredictable behavior usually isn't random. It often comes from old fears and old habits that turned into a way of moving through the world. And when you understand that, the whole thing stops feeling mysterious. It becomes easier to see what it costs them and how much of their control is actually built on trying not to feel vulnerable. So the next time someone's reaction throws you off, you don't have to get pulled into it. You can notice what's happening and still stay composed. You don't need to chase clarity or fix anything for them. Sometimes the real strength is in holding your center when someone else can't hold theirs. Once you see unpredictability for what it is, it loses its hold on you. You stop giving it more space than it deserves, and you get to protect your own peace instead of reacting to someone else's confusion.